to create their maps were very precise in the use of their senses. And in fact, that's what enables you to make maps of reality that have the current date as copyright as opposed to 1928. Now, Brian, you were saying you're an acupuncturist, right?
Yes.
Do you do other types of Chinese medicine?
Herbal.
Herbal? Have you ever gotten into oriental pulses as a diagnostic?
Yeah, pulse tone.
So if I gave you my wrist, how many different pulses could you?
On which, there's six on each side.
6 on each side. All right. So Brian has with his fingers, kinesthetically, he can detect 6 different pulses in my wrists and diagnose certain energetic flows in my body based on those pulses. Now, if I'm lucky, I could pick up Ricardo's wrist and go, "Yep, he's still alive." He's still ticking. So Brian is, through this kind of diligent study, has developed a kinesthetic skill. And those of you in here who are body workers have enhanced this. We've all tended to enhance certain of our senses. Some of us are really good at reading other people, facial expressions, mannerisms, and the way they move. So we've developed our eyes. Others of us who are musicians, there are a number of folks when we were introducing ourselves who play musical instruments, etc., are in the Segovia category. They can detect a lot of auditory differences. Right? So our life experiences tends to allow us to amplify preference to one. We call these in NLP, our senses, we call them representational systems. Right? Visual, auditory, kinesthetic representational systems, because we use those senses to represent reality. So they're systems with which we make representations, our maps of reality. Right? But what allows us to do this, again, are our thresholds of perception. Right? I can feel 1 pulse. Brian can feel 6. So his threshold of perception, he's lowered it. So what's happened for Brian is he has an inflow of what we call in NLP news of difference. In other words, there's a lot of information he's picking up here, and I'm not picking up much because my threshold's way up here. But as the senses become more finely tuned, the thresholds of perception lower. And literally, the world changes. Right? People's wrists aren't the same thing to you now as they were 5 years or 10 years ago. Right? There's a totally different perception. And a musician knows this. I mean, we all know this about various things in our lives, the things that we really have tuned our senses to. So when we begin an NLP practitioner training, we begin with what is, in a sense, the most basic and the most important. The instrument with which not only do you make your maps of reality, but the instrument with which you'll be changing your maps of reality over the course of the next 5, 10, 20 days, right? Which is your nervous system. It goes back to a kind of a classic quote from one of the, what would you call him? Not really a grandfather of NLP. He's more like a mentor to the world of NLP, a gentleman named Gregory Bateson. Some of you may have read Bateson's works. He's written a number of things. He wrote I think a really important book called Mind and Nature, and in it is the following quote. He says that the argument of this book presupposes that science is a way of perceiving and making what we may call sense of our percepts. Right? So science perceives and it makes sense of things. But perception operates only upon difference. It's like the wrist. My sensory acuity or my sensory awareness, the threshold of it, is only able to detect 1 pulse. Right? If I lower the threshold, I can make greater distinctions and have greater news of difference, as Bateson calls it. All receipt of information is necessarily the receipt of news of difference, and all perception of difference is limited by threshold. Differences that are too slight or too slowly presented are not perceivable. So in my experience, the pulses in the wrist are too slight. I haven't tuned my nervous system. Brian has. For him, they're not too slight. He can perceive them. Right? So for me, they're not food for perception. I am totally unconscious of them. It follows that what we can perceive is always limited by threshold. That is, what is subliminal will not be grist for our mill. Knowledge at any given moment will be a function of the thresholds of our available means of perception. Do that one again. knowledge at any given moment will be a function of the thresholds of our available means of perception. Right? That absolutely determines your level of knowledge, is your ability to make sensory distinctions. Right? It gives the examples that the invention of the microscope or the telescope disclosed what was utterly unpredictable from the levels of perception that were achieved before that discovery. So you think about what world the microscope or the telescope permitted you to perceive. Now we have the Hubble Space Telescope and electron scanning microscopes that reveal worlds that we were totally unconscious of. We had no idea they even existed. The same thing, exactly the same thing, is true of your nervous system. There are worlds that exist that you know not of, right? Simply because those thresholds of perception have yet to be lowered. And sensory acuity is how we call this in NLP, how we refer to this, sensory awareness, these thresholds of perception. And sensory acuity is something that is going to begin today and it's going to continue forever, right, Adrian? I'm still practicing it, right? And I've been doing this 20-some years to tune. That's exactly right. Relax, this isn't 1 and 1 is 2 and it's always going to be 2, right? This is a threshold of perception that you can literally continue to lower and lower and lower and lower. And each level that it drops, the more sensory awareness you have, the more the world changes. And it's sometimes difficult for, us to really understand the impact of this because we seem so familiar with seeing and hearing and feeling. Well, we just do it, right? And we tend to want to, well, what's the technique, or what's the pattern, or how do we do this, right? This is the instrument that you use to become a master of NLP. This is the instrument that you use to become a master at your relationship with your wife or your kids. This is the instrument you use in business. This is the only instrument you got. And to the degree that you're able to shift these thresholds of perception, then news of difference begins to flow in. Those maps are updated from 1928 to the current date, right? And you begin to respond to things as they are, not as they were represented years ago, right? By virtue of a nervous system, right, that is tuned to a degree of sensory acuity. My wife and I refer to NLP as, particularly the practitioner training, as a strategy for cleaning the instrument of the body-mind. Because what you take into life is your body-mind. That's what you've got. And if the instrument, just like the lens on a camera or a microscope, is smudged and greasy, right? The perceptions are limited. But if the instrument itself is clean, the instrument of the body-mind, then the world is a remarkably different place. So some of the things that we do for the rest of the afternoon on the surface are going to seem really kind of silly because they're so simple. But this is almost an Oriental kind of Zen thing, It's like, well, God, it can't be that simple. It is one of those things that it absolutely is that simple. That to the degree that you can educate your nervous system, it's going to be one of the absolute fundamental indicators of your proficiency as an NLP practitioner. And I say that it looks silly because of the following reason. Dana and Ricardo, could you guys slide your chairs up here for just a moment? And I'll slide this chair over and join you. Facing me, let's see, if you guys are, you guys, let's see. We'll have Dana be the detector. So Dana, you want to sit in this chair, if you would. All right, Ricardo's going to sit there, and I'm going to sit here. And what we're going to do is we're going to afford Dana the opportunity to lower the thresholds of perception in exactly the channel that she was saying earlier she'd like a little tune-up with or a little exploration of, which is the auditory system. Right? And we're going to do it in the following way. In a moment, Ricardo's going to make a sound, and I'm going to make the same sound. But since Ricardo's Ricardo and I'm Tom, there's no way I can make the same sound, right? There's going to be differences. And Dana's task is to identify what those differences are, right? Now, when we do this, what we're doing is we're assuming that right now Dana's thresholds of perception auditorily are at a certain set point. She's able to make certain elemental distinctions auditorily. And our task is to lower that threshold so she can make more and clearer perceptions and receive more news of difference by virtue of that. Right? Now, as we do this, we want to make sure that she's sort of constantly in a state of challenge. Right? So let's snap your fingers there for a minute. Okay? One more time. Okay, we'll try this to begin with. Now these are two sounds. Ricardo's making one, I'm making another. All right, what we're going to do is let Dana hear and listen to both, so she's going to be hearing them, and then she's going to be indexing the sound to the person that made it. In NLP we call this calibrating. So Ricardo's going to snap his fingers 3 or 4 times. She's going to calibrate to Ricardo so she knows that that sound goes with Ricardo. Then I'll do the same thing and she'll calibrate to me. So what you need to do, since it would be a little bit easier to know who's doing the finger snapping with your eyes open, is close your eyes.
Right now?
Yeah, right now. Now Ricardo's going to snap his fingers and then say his name.
Ricardo. 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 Ricardo.
Got it, Dana? Okay, now I'll do the same. Tom, Tom, Tom. Got it? All right, now is there any doubt at all?
I don't know.
Yeah, and why's that?
Because you said your name's after.
She's good. Boy, I thought this was going to be hard. All right, so here's how we're going to work that. In a moment, with your eyes closed,